Hey, this is Tom Judd. I have the privilege of introducing the Global Clinical Engineering Alliance talk series today on clinical engineers and the global use of medical devices at home and alternate care sites, taught by Dr. Elliot Sloane. This talk is amazing. Amazing why? Three reasons. One, the world's population of 8 billion people is rapidly has the higher ages and the very younger ages, and this really speaks, of course, to the older generation, particularly are going to be getting more and more care outside of traditional care sites at home and other alternate sites. Secondly, because nobody in the world is better to talk about this than Dr. Elliot Sloane, who's been following these issues for nearly 50 years. And last, because this is an opportunity for clinical engineers to really make a difference in care delivery in all these non-traditional sites. So join us, and looking forward to hearing what Elliot has to say.
Hello, my name is Elliot Sloane, and I'm very pleased to have the opportunity to share some time with you to talk about the global use of medical devices in the home and alternate care sites and about our roles as clinical engineers. Historically, for your information, I'm a certified clinical engineer. I've been practicing since 1975. I've held a number of vice president roles, both at Equity Institute and at a medical device and pharmaceutical manufacturer. And the last 20 some odd years, I've been a professor of health informatics and clinical information systems. In addition, I've been an advisor and trainer for WHO and PAHO since 1978. Parts of this presentation were extracted from our Canadian webinar earlier this year, and you can find that by searching Google if you like. To begin, let me briefly use one of Dr. Matt Baratich's representative forensics patient death investigations involving a ventilator used in the home. This was a home care device being used for a ventilator-dependent patient. The patient died, unfortunately. The caregiver and the patient were not able to manage the alarms and the pressure settings and deal with a blockage in the ventilator tubing, and it led to a tragic death. When I was at Medic, we had over 300,000 medical devices, and I'll mention later about half of them or more were used in medical or home care settings. Deaths in the home setting were unusual, but as we have many more applications in many more disparate settings, I think the problems, complications, and unfortunately possibly deaths will increase. There are a lot of hazards in the home healthcare environment. My co-author and researcher, Dr. Bill Gentles, summarized a year-long research project that we performed for the Canadian Standards Association. I'll give you some more details shortly, but I think the situation that we described and identified in Canada is really consistent with everywhere else in the world. ECRI noted that home care devices and recall management is one of the top 10, in fact, the number one technology hazard for 2023. I'll note that it isn't just recalls. Many medical devices in the home receive very little care, very little attention, very little maintenance, little scheduled preventive maintenance, and no recommended updates. Many technologies are in widespread use in home health care settings. Oxygen concentrators, pulse oximeters, CPAP and BiPAP, of course, ventilators, home dialysis in more and more settings, and IV pumps for many applications. A lot of used medical devices are readily purchased on the open market around the world. These are just some examples of CPAP, ventilators, infusion pumps, oxygen concentrators, and liquid oxygen systems that I quickly found online. There has been a pervasive global deployment of medical devices for home care. It's been unfolding for about 3 decades. In 1990 to 2000, when I was vice president at Medic, we had about 300,000 medical devices, ventilators, infusion pumps, apnea monitors, and the like, and nearly half of those were used in home care settings. The use of home care technologies continues to expand in the US and around the world because the relative cost, convenience, and comfort of using technologies at home is considerably higher. And also by 2010, we began to see home and consumer devices, some of which are actually FDA certified and CE marked, Pre-pandemic, some of our colleagues around the world were already observing this. Certainly in the larger countries already, home care had become a growing part of the cost and access and equity of care planning. And then since the pandemic, we have seen a pervasive deployment of technologies because we simply didn't have any other way to reach people. And we also didn't want to bring people into the hospitals, either bringing infections with them or exposing them to infections. So I've taken a little bit of time to find some articles from around the world so you know that this isn't just a US or European perspective. In 2011, Saudi Arabia was reporting early trials of IV therapy in a tertiary care hospital. It's interesting that I've done a lot of lecturing for the World Health Organization over the past 30, 40 years. And until about 20 years ago, my colleagues around the world said, well, we don't really do home care. We have great hospitals and clinics. But what I hear today is that the mobile technologies have enabled outreach into the rural areas to provide access and quality care to patients where they live, in the communities where they live. This is both a convenience and also a cost savings for all of the systems. In 2019, Brazil reported on their success and growth of home oxygen therapy in one of the provinces. Now, of course, we as clinical engineers don't publish that much in the literature, but there is a growing amount of literature in this space. By 2020, other Arab countries beyond Saudi Arabia were beginning to deploy in Jordan and other countries different kinds of home care technologies. And in 2020, this is unrelated to the pandemic, Kenya was already working on pediatric care with oxygen therapy. From 2020 to 2023, because of COVID, many home care innovations and interventions were reported globally. Oxygen concentrators, pulse oximeters, IV therapy, O2-enriched CPAP, and many forms of hospital and home or virtual patient wards were reported. Plus, telehealth and telemedicine emerged, some of which use devices like pulse oximeters, thermometers, blood pressure monitors to do remote diagnostics to assist the physician or nurse in making a diagnostic or therapeutic interpretation or intervention. Two good examples I'd refer you to for consideration were developed in the UK. They had two really interesting COVID home care programs. One is the COVID oximetry at home. Our colleague, Dan Clark in the UK, was involved in testing low-cost pulse oximeters to help identify those which were adequately accurate to be used for home care. And some were good, some were mediocre, and some were not so good. So not all devices are equal. And by the way, at that page, there's links to other information about the challenges for using these with people with darker skin or people who have fingernail polish on their hands that block the pulse oximetry light. The point is there's a lot of information that clinical engineers have been involved in identifying the proper products. And then the COVID virtual wards. So COVID oximetry at home was designed to help keep patients at home if they didn't need to come to the hospital. So they would be issued a pulse oximeter, and a nurse or aide would keep track of the community care to make sure that people weren't getting into serious health crisis. The COVID virtual wards, on the other hand, were an early discharge program. So a patient who had begun to recover and seemed to be successfully recovering, instead of recuperating in the hospital, could be sent to a home setting with perhaps a pulse oximeter, a blood pressure monitor, maybe an oxygen concentrator to help them stabilize and be cared for in the community, expanding the capacity of the community and also reducing the cost to the community. Now, the Canadian home care environment has been growing very, very quickly, and Dr. Easty Gentles and myself and a young master's degree student, Eric Wong, all participated in a research project for the Canadian Standards Association to look at the best practices and gaps in home care technology. And this was really a very interesting and exciting endeavor because it allowed us to spend a lot of time delving deeply into the challenges and opportunities in home care technology deployment. Oh, I want to point out that the actual publication is available for free in PDF format, so I encourage you to download a copy. You can annotate it and perhaps use it for extending your own activities in your own countries. Now, in the CSA report, we identified a lot of common issues in home and alternate care environments that put patients at risk, including wiring problems. Not every home has safe or reliable electricity or safe wiring or safe grounding. Lack of sensors, oxygen, smoke sensors, carbon monoxide sensors, heat and air conditioning and humidity. One of the problems we found at Medic is that some of our medical devices came back actually infested with insects because the device in a cold home was the warmest thing in the house, and it apparently attracted insects. So figuring out how to clean those devices and make them safe for reuse was its own unique challenge. Appropriate plumbing and safe watering for water for devices that may use enteral feeding or other services, and also the cognitive lapse and gaps in both the caregiver and the patient. Now, again, many of these patients are taking quite a bit of medicine. Many of these patients may have low oxygen saturation. Their cognitive level is low. They may be in pain. Their ability to follow and understand complex instructions is not going to be high or good. There are even more issues such as sanitation. How do you get rid of tubing sets? How do you get rid of contaminated wound care items? Also, when you look into some of these homes, there's insufficient space to position all of the devices or all of the necessary supplies. Pets, pests, insects, vermin are a challenge, and pollen, mold, and other contaminants. We had an experience at Medic in about 1998 where we had an infant ventilator, a high-tech infant ventilator, sent home with a baby, and the ventilator kept failing. Well, it turned out that the compressor that was being used with the ventilator was being kept in a basement that had no walls or floor. It was essentially almost a swimming pool down there, and it was compressing and pumping water up into the ventilator. So the environment is not necessarily suitable or safe for patient care. There are a lot of CE skills in the table of contents of our CSA report that I'd like to point you to. The environmental conditions and considerations is one. Human factors is a significant issue. Cognitive load, the average literacy level, the language skills, health technology assessment. What products are appropriate for a home deployment based on electricity, based on power, based on environment, based on available supplies, maintenance requirements, and the like. The whole health technology management life cycle, the maintenance, preventive maintenance, service, updates, then infection prevention and control, because many of these products have the risk of being contaminated, whether it's wound or blood or fecal material. Those products have to be managed. The disposal of contaminated waste has to be managed, and it can't just go into the common waste stream. And then medication management unto itself is another area which we sometimes get involved with, but in the home setting is really something that we need to take a look at. My team's classical clinical engineering approach to home care inspection and preventative maintenance management was done published in a 2001 Journal of Clinical Engineering article. I'll be glad to send you a copy of it. It perhaps provides a baseline for consideration and discussion as you're thinking about, well, how do you maintain medical devices that are not near the hospital, that may be a half a day away, or maybe 3 cities away? How do you schedule loaners or a group of people to go out and do periodic maintenance, replacing batteries, making sure that calibration or supplies are appropriate? This article talks about the methodology that we used, and Inside the article, we also talk about how we trained what we called our customer service representatives. Not every person going to the patient's home is necessarily a clinical engineer or biomedical equipment technician. So how do you train an intermediary to help make sure that the ventilator or infusion pump or pulse oximeter or oxygen concentrator is functioning properly? Home care can provide better value, access, and equity for our patients. The cost of hospital care continues to escalate around the world. The number of physicians and nurses per patient continues to decrease. So home care is one way of expanding our umbrella of care to more patients in a more affordable way. If we don't address the appropriate selection, deployment, and management of home health technology innovations, who's going to? Clinical engineers have a really important role to play in home care. Let's not ignore this important opportunity and challenge. Thank you for the opportunity to share this information. I hope that we will continue this really important clinical engineering discussion in the very near future. If you have comments, questions, or suggestions, please direct them to me at my email address, ebsloane@gmail.com. Again, thanks very much.